In the golden corridors of Kensington Palace, where every glance is measured and every gesture carries weight, there exists a secret language known only to those who watch closely. It's not spoken in words or written in official statements. Instead, it lives in the space between a husband and wife's fingers as they walk, in the way shoulders unconsciously lean toward each other during formal ceremonies, and in the fleeting smiles that pass between two people who have weathered storms together. Royal correspondent Sarah Mitchell had been watching the House of Windsor for over 2 decades, but nothing had prepared her for what she began to notice in the subtle interactions between the Prince and Princess of Wales. What started as professional observation soon became something more profound, a glimpse into a love story that was quietly unfolding before the world's eyes, hidden in plain sight. The signs were there for anyone willing to look beyond the pomp and circumstance. A protective hand placed gently on a lower back during a difficult public appearance. Eyes that found each other across crowded rooms filled with dignitaries. The way William's posture would soften whenever Catherine entered his vicinity, as if her very presence released tension he didn't even know he was carrying. But it was more than just the tender moments that caught the attention of those who made it their business to understand royal dynamics. It was the way they had begun to move as a unit, making decisions together, supporting each other through challenges that would have broken lesser partnerships. Their connection had evolved from the fairy tale romance the world fell in love with into something deeper, more substantial, and infinitely more compelling. As Sarah sat in her London office, reviewing months of photographs and video footage, she realized she was documenting something extraordinary. This wasn't just another royal marriage playing out in the public eye. This was a masterclass in partnership, resilience, and the kind of love that grows stronger under pressure rather than wilting beneath it. The story that was about to unfold would reveal how two people, bound by duty but united by choice, had learned to navigate the impossible balance between public service and private devotion. It was a story written not in grand gestures or public declarations, but in the quiet moments between official engagements, in the subtle ways they had learned to communicate without words, and in their growing ability to present themselves as equals in a system that had traditionally favored hierarchy over partnership. The morning mist hung low over the grounds of Windsor Castle as photographers and journalists gathered behind the cordon barriers, their cameras ready to capture what would appear to be just another routine royal engagement. But for those who had been watching the Prince and Princess of Wales closely over recent months, today felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a sense that something significant was about to be revealed. Not through words or official announcements, but through the subtle language of two people who had learned to communicate their growing bond through gestures so small they might easily be missed. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her telephoto lens and settled into her familiar position among the press corps. After 23 years of covering royal events, she had developed an eye for the moments that mattered, the instances when the careful facade of royal protocol gave way to genuine human emotion. Today, as she watched William and Catherine prepare for their joint appearance at a children's charity event, she sensed she was about to witness something that would redefine her understanding of their relationship. The first sign came as they emerged from their official car. William, as always, stepped out first. But instead of simply waiting for Catherine to join him, he positioned himself at an angle that would naturally shield her from the most aggressive photographers, while still allowing for the necessary public photos. It was a movement so fluid and instinctive that most observers wouldn't have noticed it. But Sarah's trained eye caught the way his body language had shifted into protective mode without any apparent conscious thought. Catherine, for her part, seemed to anticipate his positioning perfectly. As she stepped from the vehicle, her hand briefly touched his elbow, not for support or guidance, but as a form of silent communication. In that moment of contact, lasting no more than 3 seconds, Sarah observed something that made her lean forward with interest. William's entire demeanor changed. His shoulders, which had been set in the formal line required for public appearances, relaxed almost imperceptibly. His smile, which had been camera-ready but somewhat distant, warmed into something more genuine. The charity event was meant to highlight the couple's joint commitment to early childhood development, a cause that had become increasingly important to both of them. As they moved through the scheduled activities, greeting children and families, posing for photos, and participating in various demonstrations of the charity's work, Sarah noticed patterns in their interaction that spoke to a level of coordination that went far beyond simple royal training. When William knelt down to speak with a shy 5-year-old boy who seemed overwhelmed by the attention, Catherine instinctively positioned herself to block the child from the most intrusive camera angles, creating a small pocket of privacy within the very public event. She did this without any apparent signal from William, suggesting a level of mutual awareness that had developed through countless such encounters. Her movement was so natural that even the child seemed to relax, drawn into the protective space the royal couple had unconsciously created around him. Later, when Catherine was engaged in conversation with a group of mothers about the challenges of parenting in the digital age, William found himself fielding questions from local officials about funding for community programs. Despite being involved in separate conversations several feet apart, Sarah noticed how they remained aware of each other's positioning and emotional state. When Catherine's discussion grew more intense, with several mothers sharing difficult personal stories, William's attention would drift momentarily in her direction, as if monitoring whether she might need support or intervention. The moment that truly captured Sarah's attention came during what should have been a routine photo opportunity. The royal couple had been asked to participate in a simple art activity with a group of children, painting handprints on a large canvas that would later be displayed in the charity's main building. As they sat side by side at a low table designed for children, their formal attire somewhat incongruous with the creative chaos around them, something shifted in their dynamic. William had paint on his fingers and was attempting to help a 3-year-old girl create a perfect handprint when he accidentally brushed against the canvas with his sleeve, leaving a streak of green paint across what had been a carefully organized section of the artwork. The mistake was minor, the kind of small mishap that happens constantly during such events, but his immediate reaction revealed something significant about his state of mind. For just a moment, his face showed the flash of irritation and self-consciousness that comes with making a public error, however small. Catherine, who was working with her own group of children at the opposite end of the table, seemed to sense his momentary discomfort without even looking directly at him. Without breaking her conversation with the children around her, she reached across the space between them and deliberately added her own streak of paint to the canvas, creating an abstract design that incorporated William's accidental mark. Her action transformed what might have been seen as a mistake into an intentional artistic choice. The gesture lasted only seconds, but its impact on William was immediately visible. His expression shifted from embarrassment to amusement and then to something deeper. As he looked at Catherine, still engaged with the children but clearly aware of his gratitude, his face showed an emotion that Sarah had rarely captured in her years of photographing the royal family. It wasn't the practiced affection of a couple performing for the cameras, nor the polite appreciation of colleagues working together. It was the look of a man genuinely moved by his partner's instinctive understanding of his needs and her willingness to act on that understanding, without fanfare or expectation of recognition. The children, oblivious to the adult dynamics playing out around them, continued with their painting. But Sarah found herself focusing entirely on the silent communication happening between William and Catherine. In the minutes that followed, she observed a series of small interactions that reinforced her growing understanding of their evolving relationship dynamic. When a particularly energetic 6-year-old boy accidentally knocked over a container of water, splashing both adults, they moved in perfect synchronization to minimize the disruption. Catherine immediately began reassuring the embarrassed child, while William quickly moved to prevent the water from reaching any electrical equipment nearby. Neither had to direct the other or discuss their response. They simply acted as a coordinated team, each taking on the role that their position and the immediate needs of the situation demanded. As the event began to wind down and they prepared for the final group photographs, Sarah noticed another subtle but significant detail. Throughout the day, both William and Catherine had been handed numerous small gifts from the children: flowers, drawings, handmade crafts, and other tokens of appreciation. Royal protocol typically requires that such gifts be immediately handed to accompanying staff members for cataloguing and appropriate follow-up responses. However, Sarah observed that both were holding onto several items, carefully protecting them from damage as they moved through the final activities of the visit. During a brief moment when they thought they were unobserved, Catherine showed William a drawing that had been given to her by a 7-year-old girl. The artwork depicted what was clearly meant to be a royal family, complete with crowns and a castle, but the child had included details that showed she had been watching the day's events carefully. The figures representing William and Catherine were drawn holding hands, and there were small hearts scattered around the borders of the paper. William's reaction to the drawing provided Sarah with perhaps her most revealing photograph of the day. As he looked at the child's interpretation of their relationship, his expression showed a mixture of emotions that would have been impossible to fake or manufacture for public consumption. There was surprise, as if he was seeing their relationship from an outside perspective for the first time. There was tenderness, not just for the child who had created the artwork, but for the relationship that the child had observed and chosen to celebrate. And there was something else, something that Sarah's experienced eye recognized as a man coming to terms with a truth he might not have fully acknowledged before.
The final moments of the engagement brought one last observation that would stick with Sarah long after she had filed her stories and developed her photographs.
As they prepared to leave, both William and Catherine took time for individual conversations with the charity staff members, thanking them for their work and discussing future collaboration opportunities. These conversations, while still public in nature, were less formal than the main event activities, allowing for more natural interaction. Sarah watched as Catherine spoke with a young social worker who had been instrumental in organizing the day's activities. The conversation was clearly meaningful, with Catherine asking detailed questions about the challenges facing the families they served and offering specific ideas for how royal patronage might be most helpful. What struck Sarah was not just Catherine's engagement with the topic, which had always been evident, but the way William positioned himself during this conversation. Rather than conducting his own separate discussion or waiting at a polite distance, William moved closer to Catherine and the social worker, clearly listening to every word of their conversation. Occasionally, he would add his own questions or observations, but his primary role seemed to be supportive presence, allowing Catherine to take the lead while ensuring she knew she had his full attention and backing. It was a subtle but significant reversal of traditional royal dynamics, where senior male royals typically led such discussions while their female counterparts played supporting roles. When it came time for William's conversation with the charity director about funding and administrative matters, Catherine adopted a similar position, standing close enough to be clearly involved, while allowing William the space to handle the more formal aspects of the discussion. The symmetry of their behavior suggested a relationship that had evolved beyond traditional roles into something more collaborative and mutually supportive. As they finally moved toward their departure vehicle, Sarah captured one last image that would become emblematic of what she had observed throughout the day. Walking side by side toward their car, both carrying the small gifts they had chosen to personally safeguard, William and Catherine moved with a coordination that spoke to deep mutual awareness. Their steps were naturally matched, their posture complementary, and their attention split between the continuing crowd of well-wishers and each other's comfort and safety. In the car window, as they drove away, Sarah caught a final glimpse of them in conversation, their heads bent together over something one of them was holding. It could have been one of the children's gifts, or a program from the event, or simply notes they had made throughout the day. But the image of them sharing this private moment, surrounded by the public nature of their roles but clearly connected in their own space, seemed to encapsulate everything Sarah had observed about their growing partnership. The photos and notes from that day would become the foundation for Sarah's growing understanding that she was witnessing something remarkable in the evolution of William and Catherine's relationship. What had begun as a royal marriage, with all the formal constraints and public expectations that entailed, was transforming into something more profound. They were becoming partners in the truest sense of the word, supporting each other not just in their public roles but in their personal growth and their shared vision for their future together. The subtle gestures and unconscious coordination Sarah had observed were not the result of media training or royal protocol. They were the natural expressions of two people who had learned to trust each other completely, to anticipate each other's needs, and to present themselves to the world as a united team while maintaining their individual identities and strengths. It was a partnership that seemed to be growing stronger and more sophisticated with each public appearance, each shared challenge, and each private moment of connection that occasionally became visible to those who knew how to look for it. 3 weeks after the children's charity event, Sarah Mitchell found herself positioned outside Westminster Abbey, preparing to cover a memorial service for military veterans. The grey London sky matched the sombre mood of the occasion, and she expected the day to be filled with formal protocol and carefully managed emotions. What she didn't anticipate was how this serious, tradition-bound event would provide even more revealing glimpses into the evolving dynamic between William and Catherine. The memorial service was one of those occasions where royal family members were expected to embody the nation's respect for sacrifice and service. Every gesture would be scrutinized for its appropriateness, every expression measured for its balance between sympathy and strength. For William, whose military background made these events particularly meaningful, the weight of representation was especially significant. For Catherine, who had increasingly taken on the role of supporting military families, the day represented another opportunity to demonstrate her growing confidence in addressing serious national concerns. Sarah arrived early to secure her position and immediately noticed the enhanced security presence and the careful choreography that surrounded high-profile royal events. But as she settled into a familiar routine of observing and recording, she began to notice elements that suggested this day would offer insights beyond the formal ceremony itself. The first significant moment came as William and Catherine emerged from their official vehicle outside the Abbey. The previous week had been particularly challenging for the royal family, with media speculation about various personal and professional pressures reaching an unusual intensity. Sarah had followed the coverage closely, noting how different publications had attempted to create tension when none might exist, or to magnify small disagreements into major conflicts. As Catherine stepped from the car, Sarah immediately observed that she appeared more tired than usual, with subtle signs of strain around her eyes that suggested the recent media attention had taken its toll. William, walking slightly behind her as protocol required, seemed to notice the same thing. Without breaking the formal requirements of their public appearance, he managed to position himself so that his presence provided her with a sense of stability and support. The gesture was so subtle that most observers would have missed it entirely. As they paused for the expected photographs before entering the Abbey, William shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, creating a slight shield between Catherine and the most aggressive photographers. At the same time, his hand moved to a position where, while not actually touching her, it provided a clear signal of protection and presence. Catherine's response was equally subtle but unmistakable to those watching closely. Her posture straightened, her expression became more composed, and the signs of weariness that had been evident moments before seemed to fade into the background. Inside the Abbey, the service proceeded with the dignified formality appropriate to the occasion. William and Catherine were seated with other senior royals in positions that placed them clearly in the public eye, while respecting the hierarchical traditions of such events. Throughout the service, Sarah found herself observing their behavior through the lens of what she had learned about their communication patterns during the charity event. The first thing she noticed was their synchronized attention to the proceedings. Both maintained the appropriate level of solemn focus throughout the various readings, musical performances, and ceremonial elements of the service. But during the moments when their attention was less formally required, such as between different sections of the program, Sarah observed brief instances of the silent communication she was beginning to recognize as characteristic of their relationship. During one particularly moving reading by a veteran who had lost both legs in Afghanistan, Sarah noticed Catherine's emotional response was more intense than she might typically allow in such a public setting. Her eyes had filled with tears, and she was clearly struggling to maintain the composed demeanor expected of royal family members during formal ceremonies. Without any apparent signal or discussion, William's attention shifted subtly in her direction. He didn't turn to look at her directly, which would have been inappropriate and would have drawn unwanted attention to her emotional state. Instead, he simply moved his hand to a position on his knee where she could see it, a gesture that somehow conveyed support and understanding without requiring any response from her. Catherine's reaction was almost immediate. She took a deep breath, composed herself, and was able to continue participating in the ceremony without the emotional overwhelm that had threatened to compromise her public role. The interaction lasted perhaps 30 seconds, and was so discreet that even the cameras positioned throughout the Abbey likely missed it entirely. But for Sarah, watching specifically for these moments of connection, it represented another piece of evidence that William and Catherine had developed a sophisticated system for supporting each other through the emotional challenges of their public roles. As the service continued, Sarah observed several more examples of this unconscious coordination. When William's own emotions appeared to be affected by a particularly powerful speech about military sacrifice, Catherine's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, her attention clearly focused on his well-being, while maintaining her own appropriate engagement with the ceremony. During a moment of silence, both seemed to find strength in their shared presence, their breathing naturally synchronizing in a way that suggested deep mutual awareness. The most significant moment of the service came during the laying of wreaths at the memorial altar. As senior members of the royal family, William and Catherine were expected to participate in this ceremonial act of remembrance, with William representing his military connections and Catherine representing the broader royal family's support for military families. The wreath-laying required careful timing and precise movement, with each participant following a specific sequence designed to honor the fallen while maintaining the dignity of the ceremony. Sarah watched as William approached the altar first, carrying a wreath of red poppies and white lilies. His movement was slow and deliberate, his expression reflecting the gravity of the moment and his personal connection to the military community being honored. As he placed the wreath and stepped back, Catherine began her approach with her own tribute. What happened next was so subtle that Sarah almost missed it despite her focused observation. As Catherine moved toward the altar, one of her shoes caught slightly on the ancient stone flooring of the Abbey. The stumble was minor, barely perceptible, but in the context of such a solemn ceremony, even a small misstep could become a source of embarrassment or unwanted attention. William, who had completed his own part of the ceremony and was standing at attention as required by protocol, somehow sensed Catherine's momentary difficulty without actually seeing it happen. His head turned just slightly in her direction, and his body language shifted into what Sarah recognized as a readiness to provide assistance if needed. At the same time, Catherine recovered her balance gracefully and continued with her wreath laying, as if nothing had happened. The entire sequence lasted less than 10 seconds, but it revealed something significant about their relationship dynamic. William's instinctive awareness of Catherine's situation and his immediate readiness to help, even in a context where such assistance might not have been appropriate, suggested a level of protective instinct that went beyond mere courtesy or royal protocol. Catherine's quick recovery and her subtle acknowledgement of his concern, communicated through a barely perceptible nod as she returned to her position, demonstrated her appreciation for his attention, while also confirming her ability to handle challenges independently. After the ceremony, as the royal family gathered for brief conversations with military leaders and family members of the honoured veterans, Sarah observed how William and Catherine navigated these interactions as a team. Unlike some royal couples who maintain separate conversations and independent schedules during such events, they seemed to move through the gathering in a coordinated fashion that maximized their impact while ensuring neither was left to handle particularly difficult conversations alone. When Catherine was approached by a widow whose husband had been killed in Iraq, William positioned himself nearby, not intruding on the private conversation, but clearly available if emotional support became necessary. His presence seemed to give Catherine the confidence to engage more deeply with the woman's story, asking detailed questions about her husband's service and her family's current situation. The conversation was clearly meaningful for both women, but Sarah noticed how Catherine's ability to be fully present for the widow was enhanced by her confidence that William was monitoring the situation and ready to help if needed. Later, when William found himself in conversation with a group of young veterans dealing with various physical and emotional challenges from their service, Catherine adopted a similar supportive position. Rather than engaging in her own separate conversation, she remained close enough to participate when appropriate, while allowing William to take the lead in addressing issues where his military background gave him particular credibility. One of the young veterans was describing his struggle with post-traumatic stress and his difficulty adjusting to civilian life. William's response demonstrated both personal understanding and genuine empathy, but Sarah noticed how his ability to offer meaningful support was strengthened by Catherine's presence and attention. When he suggested specific resources that might be helpful, Catherine was able to add information about support programs for military families, creating a more comprehensive response than either could have provided alone. The coordination between them during these conversations wasn't the result of pre-planning or formal discussion. Instead, it seemed to flow from their growing understanding of each other's strengths and their shared commitment to maximizing their positive impact on the people they met. They had learned to operate as a team in a way that amplified both of their individual capabilities while respecting the distinct contributions each brought to their shared role. As the day's events concluded and they prepared to leave Westminster Abbey, Sarah captured a series of photographs that would later help her understand the full significance of what she had observed. Walking together toward their departure vehicle, William and Catherine moved with the easy coordination she had noted during previous events, but with an added element of emotional connection that reflected the serious nature of the day's ceremony. They were both clearly affected by the stories they had heard and the people they had met. The weight of representing the nation's gratitude to military families, combined with the personal impact of individual stories of sacrifice and loss, had left them both more emotionally engaged than they might typically allow themselves to be during public appearances. Rather than trying to return immediately to their formal royal personas, they seemed to be sharing the experience and processing its impact together. In the car, as they began to pull away from the Abbey, Sarah caught a final image through the rear window that encapsulated much of what she had observed throughout the day. William and Catherine were sitting close together, their heads bent over what appeared to be programs from the ceremony, or notes they had made during their conversations with veterans and family members. But more than their physical proximity, it was their obvious emotional connection that struck Sarah as significant. They weren't just reviewing the formal requirements of the day or discussing the logistics of their next engagement. They were clearly sharing their responses to what they had experienced, processing together the emotional impact of the ceremony and the conversations that had followed. It was an intimate moment of connection occurring within the public context of their royal roles, a reminder that beneath the formal requirements of their positions, they remained partners, supporting each other through the challenges and responsibilities of their shared life. The memorial service had provided Sarah with a different perspective on William and Catherine's relationship than she had gained from the children's charity event, where the earlier occasion had revealed their ability to coordinate and support each other during light-hearted, positive engagements. The memorial service had shown how their partnership functioned under more serious circumstances. Their mutual support during emotionally challenging moments, their coordinated approach to difficult conversations, and their shared processing of meaningful experiences all pointed to a relationship that had evolved well beyond the formal requirements of a royal marriage. They had become genuine partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other not just in their public roles, but in their personal growth and emotional development. The subtle gestures and unconscious coordination that Sarah continued to observe were expressions of a deep trust and understanding that allowed them to face both the joyful and difficult aspects of their shared responsibilities with confidence and grace. The autumn rain was falling steadily across the Scottish Highlands as Sarah Mitchell made her way to Balmoral Castle, where William and Catherine were concluding their annual family retreat. This was not an official engagement that would typically warrant press coverage, but Sarah had received a tip that the royal couple would be making an unexpected public appearance at a local community centre that was struggling to maintain its services for elderly residents in the remote Highland community. These spontaneous, informal appearances were rare in the carefully managed world of royal schedules, which made them all the more valuable for understanding the authentic dynamics between William and Catherine. Without the elaborate planning and protocol that governed their formal engagements, such events offered glimpses of their relationship as it existed away from the structured requirements of their official roles. Sarah arrived at the small community centre in the village of Crathie to find a scene that was refreshingly different from the grand venues and carefully controlled environments she was accustomed to covering. The building was modest, clearly showing signs of age and limited funding, with hand-painted signs directing visitors to various activities and services. A small group of local residents had gathered outside, alerted by word of mouth that their royal neighbours might be paying an unannounced visit. When William and Catherine arrived, they came not in an official royal vehicle with its accompanying security detail, but in a practical Range Rover that looked like it belonged to any well-off Highland family. Their clothing was equally informal, with both dressed in weather-appropriate outdoor gear that suggested they had been hiking or engaging in other countryside activities before deciding to make this impromptu visit. The transformation in their demeanour was immediately apparent to Sarah. Away from the formal requirements of official engagements, both William and Catherine appeared more relaxed, more personally engaged, and more willing to let their authentic personalities show through their interactions with the community members who had gathered to meet them. But even more interesting was how this relaxed atmosphere seemed to allow their relationship dynamic to express itself more naturally and openly. The first thing Sarah noticed was their approach to entering the community centre. Unlike formal events where their arrival would be carefully choreographed with specific timing and predetermined routes, this visit required them to navigate the situation together, making real-time decisions about how to manage the unexpected crowd and the logistical challenges of an impromptu appearance. Catherine was clearly more familiar with this particular community, having visited several times during previous family stays at Balmoral. She began naturally taking the lead in greeting long-time acquaintances and introducing William to people he might not have met before. William, rather than asserting his higher rank in the royal hierarchy, seemed perfectly comfortable allowing Catherine to guide their interactions based on her established relationships and greater familiarity with local concerns. Sarah watched as Catherine spotted an elderly man she obviously recognized and moved toward him with genuine enthusiasm. The man, who appeared to be in his 80s and was using a walking stick for support, lit up at seeing her approach. As Catherine greeted him warmly, asking specific questions about his health and his family, William hung back slightly, observing the interaction with obvious interest and respect for the genuine connection Catherine had established with this community member. When Catherine gestured for William to join the conversation, introducing him to the elderly gentleman, the exchange that followed revealed something significant about their relationship dynamic. Rather than simply acknowledging the introduction and moving on to his own conversation topics, William clearly took his cues from Catherine about the appropriate tone and level of engagement for this particular interaction. Catherine had obviously learned during previous visits that this gentleman was a retired shepherd who had spent most of his life working on Highland estates and had fascinating stories about the changing landscape of rural Scotland. She guided the conversation toward topics where the man could share his expertise and experience, creating a meaningful exchange rather than the polite but superficial interaction that often characterizes brief royal meetings. William's participation in this conversation showed Sarah another dimension of their growing partnership. He asked thoughtful follow-up questions based on Catherine's lead, demonstrating that he had been listening carefully not just to the gentleman's responses, but to Catherine's approach to the interaction. When the conversation turned to current challenges facing rural communities, William was able to build on the foundation Catherine had established, to discuss potential solutions and resources that might be available through various government and charitable programs. The seamless way they handed conversation topics back and forth, built on each other's questions and observations, and maintained consistent energy and interest throughout the interaction, spoke to a level of partnership that extended well beyond their formal royal roles. They were functioning as a genuine team, combining their different strengths and knowledge to create a more meaningful experience for the community member they were speaking with. Inside the community centre, the informal atmosphere continued to provide Sarah with insights into their relationship that would have been impossible to observe during more structured events. The centre's main room was set up for a regular afternoon tea service for local elderly residents, with small tables arranged around a space that clearly served multiple functions for the community. The residents who were present for their usual gathering seemed delighted but not overwhelmed by the unexpected royal visitors, suggesting that the informal nature of the visit had created a comfortable environment for genuine interaction. William and Catherine moved through the room together, stopping at each table to chat with the residents about their lives, their families, and their connection to the local community. Sarah observed that they had developed an instinctive system for these interactions that maximized their impact while ensuring that neither overshadowed the other. When they approached a table where several women were working on a knitting project for premature babies at the local hospital, Catherine naturally took the lead, asking detailed questions about their technique and the impact of their volunteer work. William's role in this interaction was not passive but complementary. While Catherine engaged with the specifics of the knitting project, he focused on understanding the broader volunteer culture in the community and the ways that residents supported each other through various challenges. When one of the women mentioned that her grandson was serving in the military overseas, William was able to seamlessly join the conversation with his own understanding of military family experiences, creating connections that enriched the overall interaction. The most revealing moment of the visit came when they encountered a situation that required them to work together to address an unexpected challenge. An elderly woman at one of the tables became visibly emotional while describing recent difficulties she had been facing since her husband's death 6 months earlier. Her grief was genuine and powerful, and her tears created an awkward moment for the other residents who were unsure how to respond to such raw emotion in the presence of royal visitors. Sarah watched as both William and Catherine immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation and the need for a coordinated response that would honor the woman's grief while maintaining the positive atmosphere of the visit for other residents. Without any apparent discussion or planning, they moved smoothly into roles that addressed both the immediate emotional needs of the grieving woman and the broader social dynamics of the room. Catherine sat down next to the woman and began a quiet, private conversation that clearly focused on listening to her story and acknowledging her loss. Her body language was completely focused on providing emotional support, creating a small bubble of privacy within the public setting that allowed the woman to express her feelings without feeling exposed to unwanted attention. Meanwhile, William engaged the other residents at nearby tables in conversations that naturally drew their attention away from the emotional interaction Catherine was handling, giving the grieving woman space to process her feelings without feeling like she was disrupting the event for others. His approach was respectful and sensitive, acknowledging the seriousness of the situation while maintaining the overall positive energy of the visit. The coordination between them during this delicate situation was remarkable for its naturalness and effectiveness. Neither had to direct the other or explain their approach. They simply moved into complementary roles based on their individual strengths and their shared understanding of what the situation required. Catherine's natural empathy and comfort with emotional intimacy made her the appropriate person to provide direct support to the grieving woman, while William's ability to maintain social dynamics and keep conversations flowing made him the right choice for managing the broader room environment. After about 10 minutes, Catherine had helped the woman work through her immediate emotional response and connect with other residents who had experienced similar losses. The woman was smiling again, clearly feeling heard and supported, and the overall atmosphere of the room had returned to its previous warmth and engagement. The way William and Catherine had handled the situation together had turned a potentially difficult moment into an opportunity for deeper community connection and mutual support. As they prepared to leave the community centre, Sarah observed one final interaction that crystallized much of what she had learned about their evolving relationship during this informal visit. The director of the centre, a local woman in her 50s who had been running the facility for over a decade, approached them to express her gratitude for the unexpected visit and to discuss some of the ongoing challenges the centre faced in maintaining its services for the community. The conversation that followed demonstrated William and Catherine's ability to function as equal partners in addressing complex issues that required both immediate empathy and longer-term strategic thinking. The director explained that funding cuts had forced them to reduce their hours of operation and eliminate some services, which was particularly difficult for elderly residents who had come to depend on the Centre for Social Connection and practical support. Catherine's response showed her deep understanding of the human impact of these changes, asking specific questions about how individual residents were being affected and what alternative support systems existed in the community. Her questions revealed that she had been thinking about these issues during previous visits and had a genuine understanding of the challenges facing rural elderly populations. William's contribution to the conversation focused on the broader policy and funding landscape that created these challenges, offering insights into government programs and charitable initiatives that might provide alternative support. But rather than simply providing information, he clearly built on Catherine's understanding of the specific local needs to suggest solutions that would be both practically applicable and politically feasible. The most impressive aspect of their joint response was how naturally they divided the conversation topics based on their respective expertise, while maintaining a unified approach to the overall problem. Catherine's focus on individual and community impact provided the emotional and practical foundation for understanding the issue, while William's knowledge of institutional resources and policy mechanisms offered concrete pathways towards solutions. When the director mentioned a specific elderly resident who had become increasingly isolated since the centre's reduced hours made it impossible for him to participate in his regular social activities, Catherine and William exchanged a look that communicated volumes about their shared concern and their determination to find a way to help. Without any verbal discussion, they both understood that this was a situation that warranted follow-up action, and they began working together to identify resources and connections that might address the man's isolation. As they walked back to their vehicle in the continuing Highland rain, Sarah captured a series of images that would later help her understand the full significance of what she had observed during this informal visit. Unlike their departures from formal events, where protocol required specific positioning and timing, this departure allowed them to move naturally together, sharing their responses to the visit and planning their follow-up actions. Through the rain-spattered windows of her own car, Sarah could see them in animated conversation as they drove away. Their discussion was clearly focused on the community centre visit, with both contributing ideas and observations about what they had learned and what actions they might take to provide ongoing support. The energy and engagement of their conversation suggested that this impromptu visit had been meaningful for both of them, not just as a pleasant diversion from their family retreat, but as an opportunity to work together on issues they both cared deeply about. The informal Highland visit had provided Sarah with a completely different perspective on William and Catherine's relationship than she had gained from their more formal public appearances. Away from the structured requirements of official engagements, their natural partnership had been allowed to express itself more freely and authentically. They had functioned as genuine equals, supporting each other's strengths while addressing shared challenges with creativity and coordination. The spontaneous nature of their decision to visit the community centre, their seamless collaboration in addressing unexpected situations, and their shared commitment to following up on the concerns they had learnt about all pointed to a relationship that had evolved well beyond the formal requirements of their royal roles. They had become partners in the truest sense, united not just by duty or protocol, but by shared values, complementary strengths, and a deep mutual respect that allowed them to tackle complex challenges together with confidence and effectiveness. The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace glittered under the light of massive crystal chandeliers as diplomats, dignitaries, and heads of state gathered for one of the most important state functions of the year. This was precisely the kind of formal, high-stakes event where royal protocol reigned supreme, and every gesture carried diplomatic significance. For Sarah Mitchell, positioned discreetly among the carefully managed press contingent, it represented an opportunity to observe William and Catherine's relationship under the most demanding and public circumstances possible. State dinners were theatre of the highest order, where personal relationships had to be carefully balanced with national interests, where cultural sensitivities could create international incidents, and where the slightest breach of protocol could generate headlines around the world. The pressure on senior royals during such events was enormous, requiring them to be simultaneously warm and appropriately distant, personally engaging while remaining diplomatically neutral, and authentically themselves while representing the entire nation. Sarah had covered dozens of such events over her career, but she approached this evening with particular interest in how William and Catherine would navigate the complex social and political dynamics as a team. The previous months of observation had shown her a couple that was learning to function as genuine partners in less formal settings, but state functions presented challenges that would test the depth and sophistication of their collaboration. The evening began with the arrival ceremony in the palace courtyard, where the visiting heads of state were greeted with full military honours and the pageantry that had evolved over centuries of British diplomatic tradition. William and Catherine stood with other senior royals to receive their guests, their positioning carefully determined by protocol officers to reflect both royal hierarchy and diplomatic considerations. Even in this most formal of settings, Sarah immediately noticed subtle signs of the partnership she had been documenting. As they waited for the official ceremony to begin, Catherine seemed to sense that William was reviewing something in his mind, possibly preparing for specific conversations he would need to navigate during the evening. Without drawing any attention to herself or disrupting the formal atmosphere, she shifted her position slightly so that her presence provided him with a sense of grounded support while he mentally prepared for the challenges ahead. The gesture was so minimal that it might have been accidental, but William's immediate response suggested otherwise. His posture relaxed almost imperceptibly, and his attention became more focused on the present moment rather than whatever preparation he had been engaged in. It was a moment of connection that lasted perhaps 5 seconds but seemed to center both of them for the demanding evening ahead. As the ceremony proceeded and they moved inside for the pre-dinner reception, Sarah observed how they approached the delicate art of diplomatic conversation as a coordinated team. The reception required them to engage with dozens of foreign officials, each conversation potentially carrying political implications, while also needing to maintain the warmth and hospitality that characterized successful diplomatic relationships. Their approach to these challenging conversations revealed a sophisticated understanding of each other's strengths and a natural division of labor that maximized their collective effectiveness. When they encountered the ambassador from a country currently facing economic sanctions, Catherine naturally took the lead in focusing on cultural and educational exchanges that could continue despite political tensions, while William addressed the more formal diplomatic aspects of the relationship that required careful navigation of official positions. The most impressive demonstration of their teamwork came during a particularly delicate conversation with representatives from 2 neighboring countries that were currently in dispute over territorial boundaries. Both delegations were present at the dinner, and protocol required that William and Catherine engage equally with representatives from both sides while maintaining strict neutrality on the contentious issues that divided them. Sarah watched as they approached this diplomatic minefield with a coordination that suggested extensive discussion and planning, but also the kind of instinctive understanding that comes from deep mutual trust. When Catherine found herself in conversation with the ambassador from one of the countries involved in the dispute, William positioned himself nearby in conversation with representatives from several neutral nations, creating a buffer that prevented the situation from becoming awkward or politically charged. The conversation Catherine was handling focused on humanitarian concerns that transcended the political dispute, allowing her to express genuine sympathy for the impacts on civilian populations while avoiding any statements that could be interpreted as taking sides in the territorial disagreement. Her approach was both diplomatically appropriate and personally authentic, demonstrating the careful balance that successful royal diplomacy requires. Meanwhile, William's conversation with the neutral representatives naturally evolved to include discussion of regional stability and international cooperation, creating a context where constructive approaches to conflict resolution could be mentioned without directly addressing the specific dispute that was creating tension between the 2 countries present at the dinner. When the time came to move these conversations toward resolution and engage with representatives from the second country involved in the dispute, Sarah observed another example of their seamless coordination. Without any apparent signal or discussion, they smoothly transitioned their respective conversations, with Catherine shifting to engage the second delegation, while William moved to speak with the first country's representatives. The symmetry of their approach ensured that both countries received equal attention from both senior royals, preventing any perception of favoritism or political bias. More importantly, their joint handling of the situation had created opportunities for productive diplomatic engagement without forcing anyone into uncomfortable political positions or compromising their own neutrality on contentious issues. As the reception concluded and guests moved into the state dining room for the formal dinner, Sarah noticed another dimension of their partnership that related to the intense personal stamina required for such events. State dinners typically lasted 4 to 5 hours, during which senior royals were expected to be constantly on, engaging with guests, remembering countless personal details, navigating complex conversations, and maintaining perfect composure throughout. The mental and emotional demands of such sustained performance were enormous, and Sarah had observed over the years how different royals developed various coping strategies for managing the stress and exhaustion. What she noticed about William and Catherine was how they had learned to support each other's energy and focus throughout the evening, taking turns carrying the primary social load when the other needed brief moments of mental respite. During the dinner itself, as conversations flowed around the elaborate table settings and multiple courses were served with ceremonial precision, Sarah observed their subtle system for managing the continuous demands on their attention. When Catherine was engaged in an intensive conversation with a foreign minister about educational initiatives, William naturally took greater responsibility for maintaining the overall social atmosphere at their section of the table, ensuring that other guests felt included and conversations flowed smoothly. Later, when William found himself in a complex discussion about trade relationships with several economic ministers, Catherine seamlessly stepped into the role of social facilitator, engaging other dinner partners in conversations that allowed William to focus fully on the economic discussion without worrying about broader table dynamics. The most remarkable moment of the evening came during the traditional exchange of toasts between the hosting and visiting heads of state. These ceremonial moments were among the most formal and politically significant parts of state dinners, requiring perfect protocol and careful attention to diplomatic language. As the toasts were delivered and responded to, every person in the room was expected to participate in the ceremonial drinking and acknowledgement of the statements being made. Sarah noticed that Catherine appeared to be struggling slightly with the effects of the intense social demands of the evening, combined with the formal constraints that made it difficult to eat or drink normally throughout the multi-hour event. She seemed momentarily unsteady as she reached for her glass during one of the ceremonial toasts, a barely perceptible moment of physical difficulty that could have been embarrassing in such a formal setting. William, engaged in his own requirements for the toast ceremony, somehow sensed her momentary difficulty without even looking directly at her. His response was so subtle and natural that Sarah almost missed it despite her focused observation. As he raised his own glass for the toast, he shifted his position slightly so that his arm provided a discreet, steadying presence near Catherine's elbow, creating support that she could access if needed without drawing any attention to the situation. Catherine's immediate recovery and her slight nod of acknowledgement toward William confirmed that his assistance had been both necessary and appreciated. More importantly, the entire interaction had occurred within the formal requirements of the toast ceremony, invisible to other guests, and even to most of the carefully positioned photographers and cameras in the room. As the evening progressed towards its conclusion with dancing and informal conversation in the palace's reception rooms, Sarah observed how William and Catherine continued to function as a coordinated team, even as the formal requirements of the event relaxed slightly. The post-dinner period of state functions often presented its own diplomatic challenges, as alcohol and fatigue combined to create opportunities for unfortunate statements or breaches of protocol. Their approach to managing these final hours showed the same thoughtful coordination that had characterized their earlier interactions. When one of them was engaged in a particularly important or delicate conversation, the other naturally positioned themselves to monitor the broader social dynamics, ready to provide support or intervention if diplomatic situations became complicated. Sarah watched as Catherine found herself in conversation with the spouse of a visiting head of state who had strong personal opinions about British foreign policy and seemed inclined to use the social setting to express views that could have created diplomatic difficulties. Rather than trying to handle the situation alone, Catherine managed to signal William about the potential problem without interrupting either of their ongoing conversations. William's response demonstrated both his attention to Catherine's needs and his sophisticated understanding of diplomatic protocol. Without abandoning his own important conversation with economic ministers, he managed to engage additional palace officials and other guests in a way that naturally expanded Catherine's conversation into a larger group discussion, where individual political opinions would be less prominent and potentially problematic. The coordination required to manage this delicate situation while maintaining the social flow of the event and avoiding any appearance of deliberate manipulation was remarkable. It suggested not only deep mutual awareness and trust, but also a shared understanding of diplomatic strategy and social dynamics that allowed them to address complex challenges together with subtlety and effectiveness. As the evening finally drew to a close and the last guests were bid farewell with the ceremony appropriate to their status and the diplomatic relationships they represented, Sarah captured a series of images that would later help her understand the full significance of what she had observed during this demanding state function. Unlike their departures from more informal events, the conclusion of a state dinner required continued formal protocol until the very last guest had left the palace. But in the brief moments between official farewells, Sarah caught glimpses of William and Catherine sharing the kind of quick, private communication that suggested they were processing the evening's events together and coordinating their final responsibilities. The exhaustion that both were clearly feeling after more than 5 hours of sustained diplomatic performance was evident in their posture and expressions during these unguarded moments. But equally evident was their mutual support and shared satisfaction with their successful navigation of the evening's challenges. They had functioned throughout the event as genuine partners, supporting each other through difficult conversations, managing complex diplomatic dynamics together, and presenting themselves to the international community as a united, capable team. The state dinner had tested their partnership under the most demanding and public circumstances possible, and they had demonstrated a level of coordination, mutual support, and diplomatic skill that spoke to the depth of their relationship and their growing sophistication as representatives of British interests abroad. Their ability to maintain their personal connection while fulfilling the most formal requirements of their royal roles suggested a partnership that had evolved well beyond the traditional constraints of royal marriages into something more flexible, more equal, and ultimately more effective in serving both their personal happiness and their public responsibilities. For Sarah, the evening had provided definitive evidence that what she had been observing in William and Catherine's relationship was not simply a series of isolated moments of connection, but part of a comprehensive transformation in how they understood and approached their shared life. They had become true partners in every sense, supporting each other through challenges, building on each other's strengths, and presenting themselves to the world as equals united in purpose and commitment. 6 months after beginning her careful observation of William and Catherine's evolving relationship, Sarah Mitchell found herself in the familiar surroundings of Kensington Palace, preparing to cover what would be announced as their final joint engagement before a brief winter break. The crisp December air carried the scent of pine from the Christmas decorations that adorned the palace grounds, and the early evening light created a golden glow that seemed to perfectly complement the sense of completion that Sarah felt as she prepared to document what had become a remarkable journey of discovery. The engagement itself was designed to highlight their joint work on early childhood development, bringing together various organizations and initiatives they had supported throughout the year, to celebrate achievements and plan for future collaboration. But for Sarah, it was an opportunity to observe the culmination of the partnership transformation she had been documenting. To see how all the subtle changes and growing coordination she had witnessed had evolved into something that would redefine royal collaboration for years to come. As William and Catherine arrived at the venue, a beautifully restored Georgian mansion that served as headquarters for one of their most important charitable partnerships, Sarah immediately noticed the confidence and ease that now characterized their public appearances together. Gone were any traces of the subtle uncertainties or careful coordination that had marked their earlier interactions during her observation period. In their place was a natural synchronization that spoke to a partnership that had found its mature rhythm. Their arrival routine, which 6 months ago had required careful attention to protocol and positioning, now flowed with the ease of two people who had learned to move as a natural unit. As they emerged from their vehicle, Catherine's hand found William's arm not as a gesture of support or guidance, but as an expression of connection and shared purpose. William's immediate response, a warm smile, and a subtle shift in position that naturally included her in his face, suggested that such moments of physical and emotional connection had become as natural as breathing. The first part of the evening involved a reception from all the organizations they had worked with throughout the year. The gathering included everyone from university researchers studying early brain development to community volunteers running playgroups for disadvantaged families. The diversity of the crowd and the range of expertise represented created exactly the kind of complex social and professional environment that would test their ability to function effectively as a team. Sarah watched with fascination as they approached this challenge with a sophistication that reflected months of growing coordination and mutual understanding. Their movement through the reception was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance, with each taking the lead in conversations where their particular knowledge or relationships were most relevant, while the other provided support, asked thoughtful questions, and ensured that everyone felt included and valued. When they encountered Dr. Margaret Stevens, a renowned neurologist whose research on infant brain development had influenced much of their policy work, Catherine naturally took the lead in the conversation, having developed a deep understanding of the scientific foundations underlying their charitable initiatives. But rather than simply stepping back, William engaged as an equal partner, asking questions that demonstrated his own growing knowledge of the field, while also helping to connect Dr. Stevens' research to practical applications they had observed in their community visits. The conversation that followed was remarkable for its depth, sophistication, and the seamless way William and Catherine built on each other's contributions to create a discussion that was more substantive and productive than either could have managed alone. Dr. Stevens later told colleagues that it was one of the most meaningful conversations about her work she had ever had with non-specialists, crediting both royals with an understanding that went well beyond polite interest to genuine expertise in the implications of her research. Similar scenes played out throughout the reception as they engaged with community organizers, policy experts, early childhood educators, and family support workers. In each case, their approach demonstrated not only individual growth in their understanding of complex issues, but also a partnership dynamic that enhanced both of their contributions to important conversations about child welfare and family support. The most significant moment of the reception came when they were introduced to Maria Santos, a young mother who had benefited from several of the programs they supported and had been invited to share her story with the gathered experts and supporters. Maria's journey through teenage pregnancy, educational challenges, and eventual success as a nurse and community advocate represented exactly the kind of positive outcome their charitable work aimed to achieve. As Maria began to tell her story, Sarah observed something that crystallized much of what she had learned about William and Catherine's evolution as partners. Rather than positioning themselves as the senior figures receiving a report from a program beneficiary, they immediately created a conversational dynamic that honored Maria's expertise about her own experience and invited her to share her insights as an equal participant in the discussion. Catherine's initial questions focused on understanding Maria's perspective on which support services had been most meaningful for her family and why. Her approach was clearly informed by months of similar conversations with mothers in comparable situations, allowing her to ask specifically targeted questions that helped Maria articulate insights that might not have emerged in a more general discussion. William's contribution to the conversation demonstrated his own growth in understanding the systemic issues that affected families like Maria's. His questions focused on policy barriers Maria had encountered and institutional changes that might have made her journey easier. But rather than approaching the topic from an abstract governmental perspective, his questions showed genuine curiosity about Maria's lived experience and respect for her expertise about the practical realities of navigating support systems. Most impressive was how their joint engagement with Maria's story created space for her to move beyond simply recounting her experience to analyzing it and offering recommendations for improving support for other families. By the end of their conversation, Maria was outlining specific policy suggestions and offering to participate in future program development, having been empowered by their respectful attention to see herself as a valuable contributor to solutions rather than simply a beneficiary of services. As the reception concluded and they moved into the main event space for formal presentations about the year's achievements, Sarah noticed another dimension of their partnership that had evolved significantly during her months of observation. The pressure of public speaking and formal presentations had always been more challenging for Catherine than for William, whose military background and earlier royal training had given him extensive experience with formal public address. But rather than simply accepting this difference in their comfort levels, they had developed an approach to shared presentations that played to both of their strengths, while supporting Catherine's continued growth in public speaking confidence. As they took the stage together to address the gathered audience of supporters and collaborators, their positioning and interaction created a framework that allowed Catherine to take on substantial speaking responsibilities while having William's support readily available if needed. Catherine's portion of the presentation focused on the personal stories and individual impacts of their charitable work, drawing on the countless conversations she had had with families and children throughout the year. Her delivery was confident and engaging, reflecting not only her natural empathy and communication skills, but also the security that came from knowing William was fully present to support her if unexpected challenges arose. William's contribution to the presentation addressed the broader policy implications and systemic changes their work was helping to achieve, areas where his political connections and institutional knowledge were particularly valuable. But his delivery style had clearly been influenced by Catherine's more personal approach, incorporating individual stories and emotional connections in ways that made policy discussions more accessible and compelling for the diverse audience. The most remarkable aspect of their joint presentation was how naturally they handed topics back and forth, building on each other's points and creating a narrative that was more comprehensive and engaging than either could have developed alone. When Catherine was discussing the impact of early intervention programs on family stability, William seamlessly built on her observations to explain how such programs could reduce long-term social costs and improve educational outcomes. When William was outlining policy recommendations, Catherine was able to ground his suggestions in the real experiences of families they had met, making abstract policy proposals more concrete and emotionally resonant. During the question and answer session that followed their presentation, Sarah observed the full flowering of the partnership she had been documenting. Audience questions ranged from technical issues about research methodology to practical concerns about program funding, to philosophical questions about the role of royal patronage in social policy development. Rather than dividing questions based on predetermined areas of expertise, they approached each query as a team, with both contributing to responses based on their knowledge, experience, and the specific needs of the question being asked. When a university researcher asked about the challenges of translating scientific findings into practical community programs, both William and Catherine contributed to the response, with Catherine drawing on her extensive community visits to describe implementation challenges she had observed, while William addressed the policy and funding mechanisms that could support better translation of research into practice. Their joint response was more comprehensive and practical than either could have provided alone, demonstrating not only their individual growth in understanding complex issues, but also their ability to synthesize their different perspectives into more effective solutions. A question from a community worker about sustainable funding for local programs prompted another demonstration of their collaborative problem-solving approach. Rather than offering generic responses about the importance of continued support, they engaged in a real-time discussion about specific funding mechanisms, potential partnerships with corporate sponsors, and innovative approaches they had observed in other communities. Their conversation on stage was genuine and productive, showing the audience how they actually work together to address complex challenges rather than simply presenting pre-planned responses. As the formal portion of the evening concluded, and they moved into a final reception for special guests and major supporters, Sarah found herself reflecting on the remarkable transformation she had documented over the past 6 months. The couple she was observing now bore little resemblance to the careful, protocol-conscious partners she had begun watching at the children's charity event. While they had maintained all the respect for tradition and institutional requirements that their roles demanded, they had also developed a way of working together that was genuinely collaborative, mutually supportive, and highly effective in advancing the causes they cared about. The final reception provided opportunities for more intimate conversations with longtime supporters and key collaborators in their charitable work. Sarah watched as they moved through these interactions with the same natural coordination that had characterized their formal presentation, but with an additional layer of warmth and personal connection that reflected the relaxed atmosphere and their genuine relationships with many of the people present. When they encountered Lord and Lady Pemberton, elderly philanthropists who had supported early childhood causes for decades, the conversation that followed demonstrated both their individual growth and their partnership development. Catherine's engagement with Lady Pemberton about specific programs showed her deep understanding of the practical challenges facing charitable organizations, while William's discussion with Lord Pemberton about strategic philanthropy revealed his sophisticated grasp of how charitable giving could most effectively support systemic change. But more impressive than their individual contributions was how their separate conversations naturally merged into a four-way discussion that was more substantive and productive than either pair conversation had been alone. They had learnt to use their partnership not just to support each other, but to create opportunities for more meaningful engagement with the people and causes they were working to support. As the evening finally drew to a close and they prepared for their final departure, Sarah captured one last series of images that would serve as the conclusion to a documentation of their partnership evolution. Walking together toward their departure vehicle, carrying small gifts and mementos from the evening's participants, they moved with the easy coordination that had become their signature, but with an additional quality that reflected the satisfaction and confidence that came from another successful collaborative effort. In the car, as they began to drive away, Sarah could see them through the rear window engaged in animated conversation about the evening's events, clearly processing together what they had learned and planning follow-up actions for the various commitments they had made. But unlike her earlier observations of their post-event conversations, this discussion appeared to be characterized by excitement and energy rather than relief at having successfully navigated another challenging engagement. They were no longer simply supporting each other through the demands of their royal roles. They had discovered how to find genuine fulfillment and effectiveness through their collaboration. Their partnership had evolved from a strategic necessity into a source of personal and professional strength that enhanced both of their individual capabilities and their collective impact on the issues they cared about most deeply. For Sarah, the 6 months of careful observation had revealed something extraordinary about the potential for royal partnerships to evolve beyond traditional constraints into something more flexible, more equal, and ultimately more effective in serving both personal happiness and public good. William and Catherine had demonstrated that it was possible to honor the traditions and responsibilities of their inherited roles, while also creating space for genuine partnership, mutual growth, and shared leadership in addressing the complex challenges of modern public service. Their growing closeness, revealed through months of subtle gestures and unconscious coordination, had culminated in a working partnership that promised to redefine royal collaboration for generations to come. They had shown that duty and love, tradition and innovation, individual strength and mutual support could be woven together into something more powerful and compelling than any of these elements could achieve alone.